Hi, and welcome to Bring Me My Books. I'm one of the hosts, Kristi Cain, and I'm here with the other host, Travis Lowe. And today we're going to be talking about The Great Divorce. We're going to discuss the first half, which is our fourth book of the year.
Yeah.
But before we do that, we always kind of like to talk about what we've been up to because we space these podcasts a little bit apart. And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of catch up with each other, but also with you, share with our listeners what we've been doing. So Travis, what have you been up to?
Well, first, thank you for kind of carrying the load for a little while and doing some of the podcasts to fill the spaces. But I'd gone through a pretty wild season where I was given I had lung cancer, given a lung cancer diagnosis initially that was really rough, not much of a chance to make it very long at all. I think through prayer, through the goodness of God, they found out that it was a little different than what they originally thought. And it was a rare form that really didn't grow much, doesn't spread much. So they were able to, they took part of my lung, but now they say they think it's over.
That's awesome.
And so it's since, I think we recorded last in April.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just been just a few months, but it's been a month of roller coasters and emotions and the full gamut of, dealing with not knowing what life holds. And so this is an interesting book to, to be thinking about during that roller coaster.
I didn't even think about the book and the theme in relation to all that. That's true. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're very grateful. So last time we did this, we were at HopeWords.
Yep.
You were getting ready. So you had all of that on your mind, but you also were waiting to hear from the doctors at that point.
Yeah, it was the weekend after HopeWords when I got the diagnosis of lung cancer.
Yeah. Wow. It's just crazy how fast, like you said, all of that happened.
Yeah, we're talking about this book. I'll share one story, not to take up all the time, but in the worst of the situation, when it looked like maybe there's just a few months to live, and I had to have the talk with my family and kind of deal with all of those kind of things that you deal with when you're looking at end of life. And one of my good friends called me and he said, my daughter told me last night that she was praying for you. And when she was praying, she just had like a vision and she could see you standing up and giving your testimony and having a smile on your face and full of joy and just telling what you had been through. And I said, wow, that's incredible. I said, if you don't mind, would you ask her if it looked like I was in heaven or was I here? That'd be great to know where I was giving the testimony.
Right. That's awesome.
But it's really been just a wild time and just it helps you to kind of rethink a lot of things and just it's been a special time for me, for my family.
Yeah. Wow, we're very grateful. We're very grateful that it turned out differently than was first expected. Well, it's not that significant, but we've had some significant things. We've graduated 2 boys.
Wow.
One from high school, and he's about to start college, and then another one he finished some training in computer-aided design. So if it officially, I say graduated, he finished some training and is ready to enter the workforce.
Wow.
And then we've got one more at home. So we're about to go probably from 3 kids at home to 1, which is going to feel big. So we've had so those have been some big life events for us as well. So it's been a crazy season.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Well, we're going to jump into The Great Divorce. We've got 2 episodes. This is a shorter book. And in some ways, I kind of regret saying that we were only going to do 2 episodes on it. But we'll get it. We'll talk about it. And hopefully, if nothing else, what we would love is just to, if you haven't read The Great Divorce, maybe inspire you to go read it. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's one of those books that I feel like every time I read it, and I don't reread a lot of books.
Right.
I'm always excited about the next one and afraid that if I don't go on, I'll miss the great book, But I reread this one, and every time I do, I feel like I get something different, there's a light that's shining on something else in a way that I need. It feels always very personal, even though it's a fantasy. And I don't even read a lot of fantasy either.
Right.
But it is. So I'm excited about this conversation with you. We're going to break the book, just so it's clear. We're going to break the book into chapters 1 through 8, and maybe talk a little bit about. There's a lot in the preface and the introduction of this as well. But we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we actually have a bonus episode. We're going to end this series, so we are going to have 3 episodes.
Yeah.
We're going to end this series with a friend of mine who teaches on C.S. Lewis regularly, and he refuses to call himself a C.S. Lewis scholar, but I kind of think he is. But anyway, so we're going to have a good bit of conversation about this. Before we actually get into the chapters, though, let's talk about like a little bit of an overview. So when you hear the title, The Great Divorce, I think it probably keeps people from reading it because they probably think that it's about divorce, maybe marriage and divorce, and it's not.
Yeah.
So will you give us a quick overview of what the book is about, and maybe some themes, or just any big picture stuff you want to share?
I think it's good that you mentioned in the beginning that it's fantasy, because if you go to a C.S. Lewis book and you're looking for nonfiction, and you start to read this book, you're going to be like
That's true.
all kinds of confused. So it's a fantasy. It's I told you earlier, it kind of reminds me of like Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm.
This idea, it's a dream that causes you to reassess your life and the way that you're living and the way that you're looking at the world, the way that you're treating people, the way that you're dealing with internal things. And the themes that I see in the book, similar to that kind of why I mentioned the Christmas Carol, is it's him dealing with probably a lot of things that he's dealing with in real life. There's several of the chapters, and you said when you go back to it, you're reading it and certain things pop out. I think it's probably like, for me, this is arguments that I've had in my head. Mm-hmm. These are lines that I've said to justify actions that aren't right. Read the chapters on pride, and I'm like, man. Mm-hmm. And the theme that I see over and over in the book, because it's a book that's kind of giving this view of heaven and hell, and he's not saying this is what I think heaven and hell is like.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, this is like you said, this is not his theology. No.
But it's helping him think through it. But the theme that I see over and over again is that if we want to go to heaven, everything else has to die. Mm. And all of the arguments, all of the pretenses, all of the things that we think, even all the things that we think make us good, that's an argument that kind of goes throughout. But isn't that good? Mm-hmm. And he said, there's no good but God. Yeah. Now, everything can be redeemed, but everything's redeemed by dying. Yeah. And so that's the theme that I kind of see. It is a story that makes you think about death. Mm-hmm. But it makes you think about death more in a sense of these thoughts and these heart motives, that we carry around with us, the justifications, more so than just like a bodily death, I think.
Yeah. And it is the death, and it is about death, and it's also about the separation of heaven and hell, which is that is the great divorce that we're talking about. And he explores a little bit of hell, and you don't necessarily realize that's what it is at first. Right. And then just an idea, again, he's not saying he thinks this is what heaven's going to be like, or that you get to explore heaven once you've died. Like
people in hell going on holidays.
Yeah, he takes a lot of license, and would admit that he does. But there's so much introspection. And you mentioned that. Who is the narrator?
Right.
It's C.S. Lewis. He puts himself in that spot. And so the main character, which is interesting, and we maybe can talk about that. I also hope we can talk about that with our guest, why C.S. Lewis would put himself in the spot of the narrator.
And he sympathizes with all the people.
He does. He really does. It is a place of humility, I think, in the end, that you see, honest humility. But I'll throw in one of the other themes I see, because it's something that I've been thinking about. And because of that, I think the light has shined on it for me, is just there's a lot of fear. And I think fear of not being satisfied, fear of not being important, fear of not being significant.
Fear of missing out.
Yes. And the way that these people handle that, the way that that's manifested in the ones that choose not to stay in heaven, which we'll talk a lot about, is they trust in themselves, which is the old story, even from the Garden of Eden. We see a fear in Eve and Adam, and thus they choose themselves. They trust in themselves. And in a lot of ways, what we see is these characters choosing themselves and not choosing to die, like you said, and trusting. So there's a lot of trust, fear.
Now there is the one place too where fear is used as a way to try to, when the unicorns come running out and the loud noise, and McDonald explains to him, well, if fear could just for a second get her to take her mind off herself, then they would have a chance of her being redeemed. That's true. Yeah. And so you see fear even in a positive light there.
And maybe it's how you respond to fear is a big piece of it. Yeah. Not that the fear is bad, but we see it responding. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, we're going to take a quick break before we get into the quick chapters, and you'll be able to hear from a few of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year, and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope. LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you.
Welcome back to Bring Me My Books. We've spent the first little bit of our podcast episode talking about just the overview and major themes. And now we're going to jump into the actual first 8 chapters, which is still a lot. But we're just going to pick, normally what we do is we just pick some of our favorite moments. We pull a few quotes, and I think that they'll all filter back into those major themes that we talked about. But Travis, I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah. Well, chapter 1, if you just sit down to read the book, you have no idea what's going on.
That is so true.
It starts with this bus ride. People making their way to the bus, people fighting. You see so many people not get on the bus.
Yes.
And you find out later that this, in his picture, is this picture of hell and these people that have an opportunity to go to heaven. All the reasons start before they even get on the bus for why they won't go. Some people say, well, it's way too crowded, I'm never going to fit. And he says when he gets on the bus, it's not half full.
Yeah, right.
People fighting in the line, throwing people out, cheating each other. And you start to pick up on some of the arguments that are carried throughout the book. But you also pick up on another theme that I was mentioning during the break is the idea of choice. That the way he pictures this heaven and hell as a choice, I think he says at one point that no one No one goes to hell that doesn't choose it. And you see this over and over again, people choosing to stay in hell because they don't want to give up something of themselves. And that starts from the very beginning in chapter 1.
Yeah, that's right. So we start in hell, and there's a big contrast. I'm going to go ahead and jump from hell to heaven in the sense that let's contrast the two. Hell is dark and dismal. The sun is never out. It's in perpetual, like it's always like the sun is going down.
Yeah.
Which to me is kind of like a loss of hope versus it's always about, you could say, you know, either the sun is always shining or the sun is always coming up, but it's just like it's always perpetually sunset. And people live very lonely lives. It's like they disagree and then they keep moving farther out.
Yeah.
And hell is just this always increasingly growing place because people don't want to be with each other. They can't get along. And so you've just got this very depressing image versus, why don't you tell us a little bit about how that contrasts with his picture of heaven?
Heaven is wide, expansive. So it's large in the sense, but he says that it feels bigger than anything that he's ever felt. And the grass is green and the sun is up and the water's running and the mountains are beautiful. And the interesting thing, though, is he recognizes when he gets there that he doesn't quite fit. Because when he steps on the grass, like it doesn't move. So it's like it's sharp, it's pointing up. And he's kind of, he's transparent, he's see-through. So there's this contrast between the people that are there who are beautiful.
And bright. He calls them the bright people, Yeah,
he said he can't even tell if they're wearing clothes or not because they just shine this brightness and beauty. And he talks about how even on earth he had caught glimpses of this kind of beauty. And I think that's something that's so important because I think so many of us that are drawn to God, it's from those glimpses of heaven. You'll see something that doesn't make sense here, but you know you were made for it. And I pick up on that over and over, these places of beauty. And so when the people arrive, they can't help but recognize the beauty. They can't help but in some sense be drawn to the mountain, but at the same time they're repelled from the mountain because if you enter into this place, you're going to have to leave some things behind.
Right.
And are you willing to leave those things behind?
Yeah, which was like what we talked about earlier. Like this is a major theme in the book. And I think it's interesting that I think that if I'm remembering correctly, there's only one who ultimately makes the choice to go on, even though all these people are exposed to the beauty and the realness. And yet they're themselves, they get in their own way and prohibit themselves from entering in.
And how true is that? Like we all get these glimpses of heaven. We all recognize the beauty of, the heavens declare the glory of God. And we all cling and hold on to.
You do.
To pride. That was the one that hit me so hard. Like the ways I can struggle to forgive somebody else. Because I'm like, well, I did everything right.
Yeah. And I think you were talking about C.S. Lewis being the narrator, and a lot of these things are things, I think you said this either before or when we were talking about. These are likely the things that C.S. Lewis struggled with himself. And I think we see that also in the screw tape letters that he also wrote the screw tape letter, and we see some of these. But at the same time, even though this was written by one person in the 1940s, it is immensely relevant to today. And so what I would love to do now is maybe just jump into one or two of these characters, and we have no way to discuss them all. But again, hopefully that will make you, as the listener, either think more about what you've read or maybe draw you to the book if you haven't read it. So let's just look at a couple of these characters. So do you have one in particular that you'd like to share or talk about? If not, I can jump in.
Go ahead, and I'll look.
I'm going to jump a little farther and talk about this priest that he encounters. And
my goodness.
And of all people, to think that they should, already be in heaven, there should be no question. He's encountered this priest who ultimately does not choose to stay. But some of the things that he says, I find myself wrestling with, again, like if we're honest, like C.S. Lewis does. And I also see it all around me. And one of the big things, and depending on what edition you have, begins at the bottom of page 35 and on 36. And C.S. Lewis is talking to him. And he says, do you really think people are penalized for their honest opinions? In other words, you really think that they can't stay here in heaven and be ultimately with God? Do they have to go back to hell just for having an honest opinion? And even assuming for the sake of argument that those opinions are mistaken. And so it's like there is this idea, I think, that we think too, well, if I'm just asking genuine questions, isn't that okay? And in one sense, I think God is a safe place for us to go. And I believe that firmly.
Yes.
But I think there is a sense, because C.S. Lewis is also always trying to, demonstrate with truth, goodness, and beauty, this truth that there is a truth. And we get to the point where we don't want to look for truth anymore.
Right.
We just enjoy asking our questions. And we have to be honest. And I think C.S. Lewis is pushing on that. Like, what are you really after?
Right.
Are you really after truth? Are you really after the answers? Or are you really just wanting to be able to be the questioner for the rest of your life? And so I think that's something that we encounter regularly.
Yeah, and you've got to remember, he was an academic.
Yes.
And this lends itself, let's have these great conversations and let's dig in and let's imagine these other alternatives and let's dig out the riches that have never been mined. And he's like, all of that's good, but we start out asking questions because we want to find truth.
Right.
But if we're not careful, the questions become the quest instead of the truth.
Yes.
And that's what this guy did. He got to the point to where he didn't believe there were answers and that all life was just, discussing all these questions.
Yeah.
And there was a quote, I love that the guy who's trying to convince him to come on tells him thirst was made for water.
Yes.
You're not thirsty to be thirsty.
Mm-hmm.
You're thirsty to find water, which will sustain you. And he said, inquiry was made for truth. There's a G.K. Chesterton quote really similar that says, an open mind like an open mouth was meant to close on something solid eventually. It's okay. And I think in my life, the struggle was almost the opposite. I didn't want to ask questions. I felt afraid to ask questions.
Yes.
And I think it's good for us to ask questions. I think it's good. God isn't afraid of our questions. But what he's taken us back to is, but what is our motive? And if you want to question your way out of anything, you can. And the guy that's talking to him actually starts to come in on his motives, and he says, the truth is these aren't honest opinions.
Yeah.
We were just goading each other on to what we wanted to believe and trying to convince ourselves of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we get to a place to where it's no longer honest, the truth is this that we see as a search for good can turn into wickedness. Really.
Yeah. And it really hits at what are our idols? And in this sense, this guy, he also doesn't want to give up being the smart one and being the intellectual and being the one that, is just,
Talk about what you mentioned in the break about him saying that if Jesus had just lived longer.
Oh, yeah. There is a point at which even, and you said, he considers basically that he knows more than, and is more advanced in his thinking than Christ was. On page 43, he says, I'm going to point out how people always forget that Jesus, here the ghost bowed, was a comparatively young man when he died. He would have outgrown some of his earlier views, if he'd lived. You read that the first time and you're like, whoa, what in the world are you saying? Well, what he really is, this is just an example of of the way that pride has just kind of eaten him alive, you know, the sense that he would think that he has gotten farther in his thinking and
he's smarter than God.
Yeah. And he says, what a different Christianity we might have had if only the founder, speaking of Christ, had reached his full stature. I shall end up pointing out how this deepens the significance of the crucifixion. And then go ahead and would you mention, without me quoting it, what he basically says about the crucifixion?
Yeah, he says that what a tragedy the crucifixion was.
Yeah, what a tragic waste. Yeah.
And the guy uses all this Christian language through the whole time. He knows the scriptures. He says that he's looking for a kingdom.
Yeah.
And the whole time he's just destroying. And that's what the guy said, well, why would I be in hell? And the other person said, because you're an apostate.
Right.
I mean, just very direct.
Yes. And I think the important thing to remember here is we can be horrified by that, or we can go back and realize, oh, where does where are the sins that it may be embracing or whatever, where does that take you? And that is important, I think, for us all to use to examine.
And I think I've struggled with that. When do we find ourselves reading the Bible with this lens of, I don't know what I would even call it, but this, that's kind of a childish, that's kind of a nonsense. That's kind of we're beyond that.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, you can.
That's right.
You can, and I think he's bringing this up because, like I said, he talks a lot about writers. Mm-hmm. He was a writer. He talks about priests because he was religious. He talks about academics because he was an academic. Uh-huh. And I think he's saying, I was an atheist. I came to faith. But if I'm not careful, I'm sitting around talking to all these people, I could talk myself out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I convince myself that I'm smarter, that I'm the one who's the mark. And that's a danger. That's a danger for all of us. Yeah.
And that makes me think too, just in talking about who he was, you also see this great temptation in several of the characters of they want to be needed and they want to be useful. And that's more important to them than just being God's child or just being a part, and if they can't be useful, if their work can't be admired and respected here, then they don't want anything of it. And I think, again, you see this is being written by a man who was, even during his lifetime, very successful as a writer. People knew who he was. And I'm sure that these are temptations that he dealt with as well, and being applauded and looked on as all that. Well, I want us to maybe talk about briefly one more character before we move on, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into the second half. But is there anyone or any part of the first half that you want to share?
Yeah, I was thinking about the guy who wasn't impressed by anything. I've been everywhere, and it's all the same. Yeah. And, hell wasn't, I was expecting when I got to hell that there would be flames and all of this, and it's just like everywhere else. And heaven isn't impressive, and it's all a trick, and they're just... And the thing that stood out to me there, number one, is how we can just amuse ourselves to death. Mm-hmm. And you can just amuse and amuse and amuse, and then you get to the point where nothing amuses anymore. But the beginning of chapter 8, is the fear that C.S. Lewis has after talking to this guy. He said, it had indeed crossed my mind that if these solid people were as benevolent as I'd heard, they would have done something to help. Now a terrible explanation came into my mind. How if this whole trip were allowed the ghosts merely to mock them? Horrible myths, doctrines stirred in my memory. I thought how the gods had punished Tantalus. I thought of the place in the book of Revelation where it says the smoke of hell goes up forever in the sight of the blessed ones. I remembered how poor Cowper, dreaming that he was not after all doomed to perdition, at once knew the dream to be false. And these are the sharpest arrows in his quiver. And he starts talking about hearing these people and what if they're right? And what if they're right? And that scares me. Mm-hmm. Because I want this good. I think I want this good, but I hear this and it's what if the man with pride, what if he is right? And what if the person with lust, what if there is something there that I'm missing? And what if I'm seeing this thing wrong? And that sense of fear, you mentioned that fear kind of carries throughout the whole book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the fear that we deal with, just as an honest fear, like, I mean, is this right?
Right. Yeah.
Is this true?
There's so many other alternatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we'll get into that a little bit, I think, even more in the second half. But for now, as always, we want to just say thank you for joining us. We feel honored that you would want to be part of this conversation, listen in, engage with us on Facebook. And as always, we hope that you will. We hope you'll check us out on social media and read along with us and just enjoy this book journey that we have. So thank you so much.